Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. So I just wrapped up a week at the Out of Acadia Landscape Photography Conference in Acadia National Park, which was just absolutely fantastic. That is hands down one of my favorite national parks along the east coast of the US. And for all of those that watched last week's on location video from that trip, I really do appreciate all the positive support on that video and all the positive comments there. It really does mean a lot to me, so thank you for that. And if you didn't get a chance to watch that video, and if you'd like to watch that video, I'll put a link in the description below, just that way you can check that out. Now, after spending the last week working with the attendees from the workshop, photographing the incredible coastline and the incredible seascapes of Acadia, it made me realize just how important that the topic of this video actually is. So, identifying a universal combination of camera settings that can apply to any and all outdoor photographic situations, well, that's pretty much impossible. But one thing that has really helped me is to understand exactly what the end in mind is for a particular composition. And what I mean by that is identifying what your creative vision is for a particular image before you ever press the shutter button. Now, when it comes to waterfall and seascape photography, perhaps the single most important component to the camera settings that you dial in has to deal with the actual shutter speed that you choose. Now, not only can shutter speed change the overall look of your photograph, but perhaps most importantly, it can change the overall story or the overall feeling that's being portrayed in your actual photograph. Now, when I first got into landscape photography, I never paid much attention to shutter speed. It was like an afterthought to me. When I'd get on location, I would dial in an aperture, I would pick an ISO, and then I would just select whatever shutter speed would result in a reasonable exposure based off of the aperture and the ISO that I dialed in, and that was really it. And for the most part, it worked fine. But when you're photographing moving water, shutter speed is king. And in this video, I want to walk you through a process that completely transformed the way that I look at shutter speed for my waterfall and seascape photography. So to jump right into it, I think it's first important to visualize exactly how certain shutter speeds can completely change the overall feeling or the tone or the story being told in an image before you make that creative decision as to what shutter speed you want to dial in for your particular photograph. So as far as a slower shutter speed is concerned, now what constitutes a slower shutter speed, that's definitely up for debate. In my mind, I think a slower shutter speed is really anything beyond maybe 2 seconds to 30 seconds, or 5 or 10 minutes. Anything in that realm right there would probably constitute a slower shutter speed. Now, one of the biggest benefits of using a slower shutter speed is the fact that it doesn't show a lot of detail in the water. It shows that it creates kind of that silky smooth look. And here's a good example. This is from Acadia National Park as well. This is from my trip a few years ago, not my most recent one. But this was a very slow shutter speed, and you can see there's no detail in this water. It looks like it's a complete mirror reflection of the sky. The water is completely still. It looks like glass, and there's literally no detail in this water at all, which is one of the benefits of using a slower shutter speed. It just kind of smooths everything out and removes all that detail from the water. Another benefit of using a slower shutter speed is the fact that it will blur the movement in the water as well. You can see that there is a little bit more detail in this water right here versus the previous image, but you can see how much of this detail is actually blurred in this overall photograph. And perhaps one of the biggest benefits of using a slow shutter speed, in my personal opinion, is the story that it can tell, the mood, the feeling that it can give the viewer. And I think this next image right here is a perfect portrayal or perfect illustration of this fact, of this term, of this quality. And here it is right here. In this type of an image, to me, because of this slow shutter speed, it creates just such an ethereal, just a very calm feeling, a very quiet feeling in this photograph. There's no detail in the water at all. All you see is these little lily pads in the foreground right here. The sky is just reflecting, the water is reflecting all of the color in the sky, and it just creates that just very calm and that very quiet photograph. Now, on the flip side of that is a fast shutter speed. Now, a fast shutter speed could be anything from, 1/100th of a second in higher, anything quicker than that. And once again, that's completely up for debate. That depends on who you ask. If you ask a sports photographer what's a fast shutter speed, they are probably going to tell you something completely different than a landscape photographer would. But I generally think of a fast shutter speed of 1/100th and above. And one of the big benefits of a fast shutter speed is that it creates the most detail. So you're going to get a lot more detail out of moving water using a fast shutter speed than you are a slow shutter speed. And here's a good example. This is from my most recent trip to Acadia National Park. This is the Bass Harbor Lighthouse, which is a very iconic location in the park. And as you can see, there was a lot of these waves were crashing up on these rocks, and it was just producing a lot of detail. So I used a fast shutter speed to kind of freeze that motion right there, because the shutter speed is only open for a very short amount of time. It's a very fast shutter speed. So anything that's moving throughout your frame, it's going to freeze that action. And this is a perfect example right here. You can see all the little droplets of water all throughout here, and it really makes this image what it is. Now, on the other side of that as well, it's going to show the actual freezing of the movement of water. So it's going to show the most detail, and it's going to freeze the motion as well. And that's another one of the big benefits of using a fast shutter speed. In this image right here from Yosemite National Park, I think is a good illustration of that. It just freezes all of this movement right here. You're not getting really any movement at all. All the detail is really retained in this crashing waterfall right here. And perhaps the biggest benefit of using a fast shutter speed, in my personal opinion, is once again, much like a slower shutter speed, a fast shutter speed tells a story as well. And this story can be something that's very powerful, very strong, a very dynamic story. And this is a good example here as well. This is from Yosemite National Park also. And the waterfalls this particular spring were absolutely raging. There was so much flow. The flow was so heavy coming off these waterfalls. By using a fast shutter speed, it just freezes all of that movement. It captures all of that detail, and it shows kind of the ferocious nature of these waterfalls and how powerful and how dynamic they actually are. And if I use a slow shutter speed on this particular image, it just would not look the same. It would have taken away from that powerful feeling. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits of using a slow shutter speed, is the story that it can tell, that calm and quiet feeling, versus a fast shutter speed in a story that it can tell, which is that powerful and dynamic and just strong type of an image. Now, the third type of shutter speed is something that I call a blended shutter speed. And this is kind of a combination of both of them. So maybe anything between 1/100th and 1/100th of a second, and maybe 1.5 or maybe 2 seconds. Anywhere in there would constitute kind of a blended shutter speed. And the benefit of this is it blends both. So you're not going to get all of the detail in the water. You're not going to lose all of the detail either. You're going to get an average amount of detail. And here's a good example right here. This is from West Virginia a couple of falls ago. And let me zoom in here. And you can see that there's plenty of movement in the water here. There is plenty of detail in the water as well, but it didn't freeze the action. There's still, you can still see the movement, and it wasn't such a slow shutter speed that it lost all the detail. So this is kind of a good example of that blended shutter speed. And this is personally one of my favorite types of shutter speeds to go for when I'm photographing waterfalls or any kind of seascape photography. Here's another example right here from Maui, where you can see that there's still plenty of detail in the water all through here, but it didn't freeze the action. It didn't lose all the detail by using a slow shutter speed. It's kind of a balance of both. There's an average amount of detail, an average amount of motion in this water as well. And I think that this example here is one of my favorite examples of a blended shutter speed. I love the wave action in this particular image. You can see that it's not quite freezing all the detail. You can see there's certain areas here where it looks like it is freezing the detail, but you can still see a lot of the motion, a lot of the water kind of pouring off of these rocks right through here. And I think that this is just a great example of that blended shutter speed, where it shows the movement and still retains a fair amount of that movement, or a fair amount of that detail as well. So when do you know, how do you know when to use which type of shutter speed? And this is kind of the aha moment for me after I kind of walked through this process, and it made me, I guess, understand from a visual perspective. I think as photographers, we're all kind of lean more towards learning from a visual perspective. I know I definitely learned from a visual perspective, and walking through that process, and that really helped me kind of open my eyes as to how shutter speed not only changes the look of the photograph, but it changes the feeling, the mood, and the story being told. So what helps me to determine exactly what shutter speed to use when I'm on location is, when I get on location, is to actually survey the scene. What is the water doing naturally? If you're photographing the ocean, if it's a stormy ocean, if it's big waves crashing against the coastline, that might be a good opportunity to use a fast shutter speed. Like this example right here along the Oregon coast, these waves were crashing into the sides of these sea stacks right here. And it was just creating this awesome splashes of water. And using that fast shutter speed, froze that detail, captured all the detail, froze the movement, and it shows how powerful this scene actually is, because that's what I experienced when I was on location. I was watching these waves and I felt how powerful they were and how dynamic and how just strong this moving water was. So that kind of pushed me towards using a faster shutter speed. Now, on the flip side of that, slower shutter speed, if you get on location and waterfall is just kind of, just an average flow, nothing too fantastic. It's not raging. There's not tons of water flying off of the waterfall. That might be an opportunity to use a slower shutter speed, but keeping in mind that that slower shutter speed is going to create that calm and quiet and ethereal photograph. And this is a great example right here. If I were to photograph this waterfall using a fast shutter speed, I think it would have completely transformed this image. But by using a long shutter speed, it just created this very quiet, very ethereal, and very simple photograph. And I think that slow shutter speed is what made this image exactly what it is. Now, this next example right here, I think really is a great illustration. This is the image from Bass Harbor Lighthouse, but this was taken a couple years ago. There wasn't a lot of action in the water. I used kind of a blended shutter speed. The water's not completely frozen. Shows a little bit of movement in there, not a whole lot, but there is a little bit of detail. But this photograph is a very peaceful image to me. You have the man sitting here, he has his tripod set up, looking up at Bass Harbor Lighthouse, getting ready to capture the photograph. It just looks like a very peaceful scene, a place that you could just sit there and hang out for a while. And here's the image that I captured just last week. A completely different tone to this photograph. An angry ocean splashing up against these rocks right here, just creating these huge waves against the coastline. And this creates a very powerful, almost very tense and dynamic type of a situation. So if you go from this image, quiet and peaceful, and this image, completely different. And the only thing that changed really, the composition is slightly different, but the only thing that's really different here is the shutter speed. So using those different shutter speeds to tell that story and having that in the back of your mind, I think is absolutely critical. And here's just one more final example. This is a good example of a blended shutter speed. And when you're on location and the water's not doing anything exceptional, it's not raging, there's not huge waves, the river or waterfalls aren't raging, and maybe it's not completely calm either. This is a good opportunity to go for that blended shutter speed to show that movement and still retain a little bit of that detail. And that's exactly what I did right here. There's still plenty of detail in this water, but when you look at it, you can absolutely see that it is flowing all the way down throughout the frame in the bottom right-hand corner. So a blended shutter speed is also another fantastic shutter speed to go for. But I think walking through that process really was that aha moment for me to help me understand exactly how shutter speed can transform the feeling and the mood in an overall photograph. And I personally think that that's one of the main goals with an image, is to make somebody feel something when they're looking at your photograph. So I really do hope that information was helpful. And next time you're on location photographing any kind of moving water as well, you can think about the type of story that you're trying to tell, the mood that you're trying to portray based off of what you're experiencing at the time. Whether it's strong, powerful, dynamic scene with rushing water, or maybe it's a quiet, quaint, or calm scene with just soft water moving throughout your photograph. So before I do wrap up this week's video though, I do want to say just a big thanks once again to the longtime sponsor of this channel now, which is Squarespace, who I use for all of my website and blog and e-commerce needs. Squarespace provides a dynamic and attractive online platform to create your website. You can display your photography using Squarespace's professional portfolio designs and customize the layout and look and feel of your gallery just so you can make it your own. With Squarespace's traffic overview feature, you can track trends in page visits and views to better optimize your content, and you can even grow and engage with your customers with Squarespace's email campaign tools, which will enable you to create engaging emails that match your website with your products or blog post and logo, just so your messaging remains consistent. So if you're looking to start a new website or possibly upgrade your current website, check out squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So I really do hope you enjoyed this week's video. And if you did, if you have any questions, of course, please leave those in the comment section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it that thumbs up, definitely helps the channel perform better, helps the video perform better, and ring the little bell notification as well. I've heard from quite a few folks recently that they're not receiving the email notifications from YouTube notifying them of when I do upload a video, and that is because YouTube no longer sends those out. I think they stopped maybe a month or so ago. So the only way to get notified whenever I do upload is to ring that little bell notification and set the notifications to all, and then you'll be notified every time I do upload a video. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, if you could subscribe, that would definitely mean a lot to me. I really would appreciate it. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.